what we're talking about. So we're talking about the back end of your news package and editing a package continued. That's what we're talking about. So this is an overview. The process is the same screen that was on last week. That's Ren. So same thing. I've just highlighted the point or bolded the point. We're at currently. Would you mind moving a little bit back, because you guys are, when the contact tracers contact me, they're going to be like, oh no, you can come a little forward actually, and you can move a little back. They're going to be like, is everybody 6 feet apart? And just got to keep it that way. So, thank you. So, cool. This is where we are in the process. So, hopefully we've got recorded our reporter track. If you haven't, hopefully you're at the point where you're about to start doing that. And now we're going to be editing that pops and putting B-roll on top of it. Today we're going to talk about editing audio, adding graphics. You guys know how to color correct already. I'm just putting it here as a reminder. And that's what we need to do to wrap up the project. So talking about B-roll, reminding you that line that your video drives your writing, which drives your editing. So we wrote our script based on the video that you have available. And now that script that you've written and that you've recorded is going to drive your editing. Now, drive what B-roll you put on top of it. So basically, say dog, see dog, or more appropriately, say moose, see moose, say butterfly, see butterfly, in your projects. And remember, this is the easy part. So having the script done and written and figuring out how to tell a story is usually the most challenging part of an edit. This can still be really time consuming, but it's less, and like really making that edit invisible is time consuming, but figuring out the B-roll is less complicated because you figured out that story. So things to think about when you are adding B-roll is using the best part of the shot and using the best shots that you have available. A lot of it is freehand, so you want to cut out the shakes as much as possible. And for those of you doing the moose project, I have some additional, more stable moose B-roll to add that I'm going to dump in the assignment sheet in a Google Drive as well. There's about 5 or 6 more moose shots that you can use in your project. Making sure you're using the best stuff that you have. So good quality B-roll. Just because it's there doesn't mean you have to use it. And then thinking about your sequences. So we learned how to do a sequence of the bakery project. You want to do the same thing in all other videos where you have opportunities. So if you are showing the process of how they measure tree trunks in the moose one or how they measure moose brows, you have a wide shot and you have the ability to cut to a close-up from somewhere else, showing that wide, medium, and tight shot of it. Or of the butterfly being released. If you have a wide shot of them out there, then cutting to a close-up of the butterfly being released. So still thinking, how can I sequentially show a process here where I have the opportunity to do so? Even if it was shot at different times, can you bring it together and still create a sequence? Because sequence editing should be a part of almost all editing. When you're bringing down that B-roll, remember, do the same thing that you did with the bottles project, just drag down the nat sound as well. I'm going to talk a lot about nat sound today because a lot of the files either don't have good quality nat sound or some of them don't have some. So we're going to learn about stealing it from other places, but always start by dragging down the nat sound. And we will work with that as we edit audio. So don't forget to bring it down. Now you're putting in those nat pops. If you've left room, you've written them into your script and you know you have space for them. So making sure you have those gaps in there. And now, we're going to talk about some reframing issues that come up with this project. I'm going to delete that guy, and we're going to delete that. You don't see that anymore? Okay. So, what you're going to see for those of you doing the Moose project is with this B-roll and possibly with the other B-roll I give you, when you drag it down onto the timeline, it's going to need to be reframed. Let me just double check my settings here. Okay, awesome. So now you've got your timeline set up, you've got your interviews on it, you're starting to add your B-roll. let's say we're gonna drag, that's the sequence. We're gonna drag this nice shot of a moose here down. Let's get one where he's better in frame. There we go. That's a better framing of him. So Mr. Bruce is doing what he does best and eating everything in sight. So when you drag him down onto the timeline, didn't reframe. No, there we go. I need to drag him into this timeline. It's more zoomed in. So as you can see here, it's more zoomed in on your timeline than it was in the original. This is because this footage is a higher resolution and it's 4K. And in the next assignment, we really learn how to work with 4K and how to identify it and that. But for this assignment, for now, before we get into the technicalities of it, just resize it. Don't just leave it like this. Go in. You can adjust the size of the frame here. You can double click on the shot and you can reframe it however you want to. Maybe you can set it back to normal. Or since it already started zoomed in, you can like zoom it in a little less and still not lose resolution. Kind of make Mr. Moose look as good as he possibly can here. So don't just leave it there, because what I end up seeing in this project is a lot of moose butt shots. Because people just didn't reframe it and it's just unflattering shots of the moose that nobody needs to see. So please make sure that they look as good as possible. So with that, also another way you can quickly do that is you can right click and say set to frame size, and that will just set it down to the original. I usually like to manual reframe, especially when there's only a few shots. This is only a few shots of the moose that are 4K. I just do it manually, but there is an option where you can go into Premiere Pro and go into the preferences and go into your media and set it to default and say set the frame size. So basically, if you have a ton of 4K footage and a ton of like footage that varies, you can just have it that the minute you dump it on the timeline, it just sets it to that. I don't like that preference just because I like to know as I drop it on the timeline if it's a different resolution, and because I can zoom in more. And we get into that in the next project. But for now, just know that you should be reframing those. So same with the like butterfly still images that you may be using. If something moves onto the timeline, so let's say we've got the butterfly here, and I need to change some default settings because it's making these images super short. Say you drop it on the timeline and it's zoomed in a weird spot, or it's not filling the frame. You want to make sure, wake up from here, that you're filling the frame and it looks good. So you want to make sure that you are manually adjusting these. So again, to manually adjust, just make sure it's selected, double click, blue boxes appear and allow you to resize that. Yeah, please.
So for the the caterpillar image, do you want us to kind of like have a pan of like the image kind of like slowly moving in to like create intrigue, or is that kind of what you suggested?
Great question. So in this assignment, so typically when you use still images in video, you typically want to add a tiny bit of motion or animation, which is what you're talking about. So a slight pan or a slight zoom in, very slight, just because when you see a still image in the middle of the video, it's kind of jarring and stands out like a sore thumb. So adding that subtle motion makes it look more fluid. So, but for this assignment, since we haven't gone over animation, it's not required. If you're interested in that, if you know how to do that already, I highly encourage it. But it's not required for this assignment. So yeah, typical best practice for that, adding a little bit of motion into it is a good tip. So another thing is honestly, and there's varying opinions on this, typically in video, you only use still images when you don't have actual video to use instead. So sometimes you only have still images of something, and that's way better than no visual at all. Other people will argue that there's plenty of other times that you should use still images. But typically, rule of thumb that I use, that I've been told to use is, if you have B-roll for it, you have good quality B-roll, it's a video, it's not a slideshow. So use that video. In this example, both projects have still images that there's only still images. There is no video of caterpillars. They weren't hatching at that point. There's only one shot of the wolf escaping, and then there's a few still images. So you really, if that's included in your story, you have to use those. So like another way to use these, like for example, the wolf here, there's obviously a video of him escaping. But here, there's kind of like a process of him peeking out there. There's him like looking really, with his little dirk face over there, looking like he's all drugged up or something. Then he's got his cute little nose sticking out, and then he starts to emerge. So what you could do with something like this is you could bring this into the timeline, step 1 into the timeline. I'm gonna zoom in there and make this longer. And if you're new to adding images into a timeline, it just works like a video. You can extend it out, make it shorter, do whatever. Make sure this guy's filling the frame nicely. And bring that one down. And here, you could do a little fade across here. So bring him in, you've got him looking out, and then fading into the next shot. So since it's the exact same framing at a different point, that adds a little bit of motion so that it's a little more visually interesting, even if you aren't panning across. So getting creative with your images, also not reusing B-roll. I don't want to see the same shot twice in your footage. You can see similar shots, but you want to show visual variety. Honestly, like if you have absolutely nothing to use, yeah, showing a shot twice is better than showing nothing. But in these projects, there is definitely, you may have to use all the wolf images, you may have to use all the butterfly images and things, but there is enough to tell the story without showing anything twice. So that's a good best practice in video, only showing one thing. So yeah, also there's something else happening. So if, for example, you are dropping the moose footage onto the timeline and it's not zoomed in, and you haven't adjusted, and especially if you're on your laptop and you haven't adjusted settings. So let's say I drop it on the timeline, this moose is not zoomed in, but then my other clips on the timeline are like this. You set your timeline to the moose, which is back. So if for some reason you're dropping clips onto the timeline and they look like this, and your main B-roll looks like this, let me know, because we need to fix your project and fix your timeline. And I'm not going to go into the technicalities of how that works yet, because we're doing a lot of new things in this project. But off of the next project, you'll know how to fix that yourself. That shouldn't happen though, because based on the order we're doing things, you're putting your sound bites on your timeline first, and by putting your sound bites on your timeline, you're conforming your timeline to your sound bites. So that shouldn't happen, but if for some reason you're having this happen, let me know and I'll help you fix it. What should be happening is you're dropping the moose onto the timeline, or you're dropping the butterflies and they're kind of zoomed in too far. Okay, any questions on adding B-roll or images or anything? Awesome. Okay, I should know I'm zooming this in. So I'm about to go into audio. Okay. Audio, okay. Typically, this I'll leave to do pretty much after I've added all my B-roll. You can start by editing your dominant sound earlier on. So this is the point where we all should kind of be at with our narration on our timeline. You can do an audio class right now and set everything to -12. It's up to you. But typically I will wait till I've dumped all my B-roll to really start editing audio. So now, the difference with this project is it's the first time that we've had both narration and nat sound. So first one we had music and nat sound. The other one we just had people talking in dialogue. So now your dominant audio is every time there's a sound bite, every time somebody talks, there's narration, and your nat pops that you've hopefully made space for in your project. Those are all to -12 decibels. So that is what you are balancing that to. And that is what you want to balance first. That's the rule of thumb. Always balance your dominant audio first. Like you did with the bottles, you balance the music first. Ooh. you balance the music first. In this example, you're balancing that dominant first. Now, this is where layer editing will help you a lot. So this is an example of an edit that I have that does include music, but looking at the layers here, so we have, I have all my dominant sound on track 1. You can have all your dominant sound on track 2, it really doesn't matter, but having all of it on one track as much as possible will really help you doing that first pass of audio editing, because you can just go in and hit the solo button, and then you can ignore all your nat sound, even though it's on your timeline, and just listen to that and set it to -12. So let's say I have all my dominant there, I hit that S button, and then it's only going to play what's on that track. I'm setting that to -12 decibels. Okay, so then, adjusting your background sound. Again with this, it's the same as the bottles. I can't tell what your levels are with your background sound. I'm going to suck it into Premiere and check your dominant audio. But natural sound needs to just be audible but not overwhelming. Usually that's between -24 and -36, but that's just like a ballpark. You want it audible but not overwhelming. Okay. Now we're going to talk about stealing nat sound, and it's technically called sliding nat sound. Okay, so you're going to notice that with some of the clips, they either have no nat sound or bad nat sound or zinging or something like that. So just because a clip doesn't have good nat sound doesn't mean you should just delete it or you shouldn't include it in your project. You're going to need to find some nat sound somewhere else that matches it for this project. So as long as the audio is matching the visual, that's totally okay from where you pull it from. So for example, like this guy. You can kind of hear him, not really, it's just really like a lot of static. Whereas at other points in the B-roll, there's some general footage of things, like general sounds of like things rustling or the wind blowing through leaves and things like that. So putting that sound from another clip and putting it under this at a low level will make the video more appealing and smoother. So just make sure that you're not pulling something ridiculous, like that you're not pulling like a water sound. I mean, it's an extreme example, a water sound onto a museum. Obviously that doesn't match the visuals. Doing what you can to match the visuals there when you don't have good nat sound. Another example of when you might want to do that is somebody is talking off camera. So if somebody's talking off camera and you are not using that audio, and you can't see somebody's lips moving on camera, then just pull that sound from somewhere else and get rid of that. You're gonna probably have some examples where you're using B-roll that has people talking in it and they're on camera and their lips are moving. Typically, you wanna avoid putting people talking over people talking. If you need to though, because it looks weird if you just have random rustling and you can actually see somebody's lips moving in the B-roll, put it really, really low. Really low, so that you can kind of hear that there's somebody talking in the background, so people's brains still kind of connect the visuals to the audio, but not so much that your brain doesn't know who to listen to. Because that's often the problem that I hear is when you're using B-roll that has somebody talking and you're playing both audio tracks, they start to fight with each other and your brain's trying to listen to both at the same time. And that's not good, because then they're not processing your story, because their brain's like, wait, which sentence am I supposed to be listening to? So be super, super careful about putting either, B-roll with a soundbite over narration or just 2 stacks of people talking. Very, very careful when you do that. Try to avoid it if possible. Okay, so you're moving the nat sound down. When you move it down, move it onto a different layer. Kind of like you had your song on a different layer before. When you pull down some B-roll, okay, I'm gonna pull some stuff. I'm gonna pull this shot down. A lot of that sound. I'm going to pull it over Kennedy over I'm gonna make sure that my audio goes down onto that different layer, and I have both. So then I'll edit my dominant audio first, and then going back and editing my nat sound, and dragging that all the way down. Now if you have a nat pop, so let's say you're starting the video with a nat pop, or you have nat pops in the middle, which I hope you do, dragging this onto the timeline, and if I had even balanced to -12, if it goes straight from this nat sound to Kennedy talking, let's see.
A bunch of trails to do on the island.
It's just really jarring. So to incorporate your nat pops in, you want to use the pen tool. So you probably learned about using the pen tool in the LinkedIn Learning videos before, but this is how you use it for a nat pop. So typically when you're going into a soundbite, you're going to have B-roll overlapping the first word or two of your soundbite. It's good practice. It makes for a nice transition. But then you have the issue of like, okay, obviously if I overlap there where she starts talking, I can see she's starting to talk there. Then I have my super loud nat pop here. You don't want it to drown her out. So you're going to edit your nat pop to -12. Drop that down a bit. A little lower. And I've got her to -12.
To do on.
Just drop her to -12.
Else to do on the island.
More or less there. So then I've got them both to -12, but right as she starts talking, I'm going to switch to my pen tool. I'm going to make a spot in the audio, and I'm going to make a little gradient, and I'm going to drop it right before she starts talking. And kind of play with it. See what sounds good, because you want to have a nice little fade. You don't want the fade to be too quick, but you also don't want it to be too long. And listen to like what sounds clean. So right here, let's take a listen and see what this sounds like. So we have our nat pop of wind noise in a boat.
A bunch of trails to do on that.
Cleaner, but still a little sudden. So I'd probably go back here, kind of stretch out this gradient more. Maybe have it down a little before she starts talking and extend this B-roll out a little more. So it's a little more of a gradual transition. So let's see.
A bunch of trails to do on the island.
Okay. She's obviously starting in the middle of a sentence there, but that audio sounded pretty clean going into her talking there. So really using the pen tool to kind of finesse your audio edits, make it sound clean, smooth, flows into each other. You can always hear what you need to hear. Another audio editing technique that I want you guys to start using is using crossfades or audio, I think it's called like constant power and things like that, across B-roll. So you may have noticed this in your bottles project as well. But when you put like two types of nat sound next to each other, sometimes you hear an audible pop as it goes from one piece of nat sound to the other. And you'll know it when you hear it. Or sometimes it's just jarring. So like let's say you're going from this part over here. Say we're going to put this, we'll leave it there for now. I'm going to go to the sound of these trees rustling. I have no idea what this is going to sound like, so let's just listen.
A bunch of trails to do on the island.
So it's a little sudden. There was no audible pop there, but honestly just adding a default transition, making sure it's not on the visuals and just on the audio, and having that in there will smooth out a pop and just make it cleaner. You don't want to be able to hear the edit. That's what it's called. You don't want to hear where those cut points are exactly, and having those audio fades really helps there. Okay, then adjust the level of it. So you'll get to a point in your editing where you'll know what length of audio fade you'll need there. I found that most times 3 to 5 frames, and I'll just double click on it and type in 3 frames, is enough to get rid of a pop. Sometimes you'll listen to it and be like, okay, this needs a longer fade. Maybe this needs 8 frames. 38, just 8. And play with that and see how it sounds. So a lot of it is playing, figuring out what sounds good. If I fade this longer, shorter, how does it sound clean? but using these fades, using the pen tool to make it sound clean. This is like the next level of audio editing and what I expect you to do in all your projects now. Okay, so not hearing the edit. Another thing that you may need to do is edit people's sound bites and edit like little drops into it. So here's the timeline. I'm going to show you this video later. But here, like as you can see, I've used the pen tool to adjust people talking here. So I have this bizarre looking spike over here where I have used the pen tool to adjust the audio. There is where he turned away from the microphone. So if somebody like turns away from a microphone, bumps into a microphone, or something weird happens, you need to fix that. That's usually what will cause a disturbance in the mic is somebody hitting it. People with long hair, long earrings, they'll hit the mic, and you'll need to work using the pen tool to balance out the audio. Or, in general, some people change volume as they speak. A little bit of variation is totally normal, but you'll have examples where somebody starts super excited and then kind of gets less excited and really quiet, and then the end you can't really hear them anymore. Or the opposite, they get more worked up and they get louder. So you don't need to fix everything, only at points where it's super noticeable. So like here, let's go to the back of Kennedy soundbite.
I'm an animal scientist, so working with the vegetation is very new to me, but I've liked learning about all the new plants. And
So she doesn't have a ton of variation there.
I love it. Like I said before, I'm an animal scientist, so
I might go back and adjust that a little bit, because the I love it is a decent amount higher than the rest of it. So then just going back to the pen tool and creating a very slight little increase there where she gets softer. Maybe bring it back down there, just bringing that little bridge up. Or if there's like something where they hit the microphone, you may have to do something really sudden, like around a spike. So let's say that this was somebody hitting the microphone. You may need to like create 4 points and just drop the audio really low over a disturbance. So going through, and again, you don't want your viewer to notice these. This is a part of invisible editing. Sure, your timeline may look like a pen tool mess, but to your audience, it should sound really clean, and they shouldn't have to adjust their volume once. And they shouldn't have to strain their ears to try to figure out what somebody's saying. So doing this to make sure that it is a clean edit. Okay, any questions or comments about what are you editing? Yeah.
So for nap pops, they're kind of like louder portions of the natural sound that kind of fade in or out with the sound bites. Is that basically what it is?
Yeah, so they would be. So that's where your natural sound becomes dominant. So you're going to have gaps. So you might want to open with one. That's a typical way to open a story, is to open with a nap pop. And you're going to want to have at least a few in the middle. So let's say you're going from soundbite to narration, and you have, I don't know, the sound of a moose eating something, or the sound of the wind going through the prairie in the butterfly one. So you may have that B-roll overlapping on the front and the back of the next soundbite. So kind of like we did here with Kennedy. So this part is only overlapping over the front. But let's say this was between two sound bites, and we had, say, Eli back here. So you may have the visual overlapping over both sound bites, and then you just have the audio like really low there at the end of the sound bite, bring it up and bring it back down. So yeah, that's where the nap pop is, just where your natural sound becomes dominant in a break between narration or interviews.
Yeah, so just like bringing intrigue when you're switching between two parts, like narration and sound bites.
Yeah, absolutely, and it makes it smoother. It makes it like more. It makes it feel more real. Honestly, it makes for a more, orally makes it more interesting sound when you're editing. And honestly, can help because sometimes when you go from soundbite to soundbite, it's just really jarring. And having a nap pop can just kind of smooth the edit out and make it noticeable to the viewer. So. Absolutely. You don't have to do it between every soundbite, but between quite a few of them, you typically want to have that. So yeah, that's how you edit the audio with that. Any other questions on audio before we move into graphics? Okay, moving on into graphics. So in news, we typically see two types of graphics in news packages. You see locator supers and lower thirds. So this is one of those dumb things in video production where there are like 7 different words that mean the same thing depending on the context. So a super, a lower third, and sometimes they're called like a graphic, will mean the same thing. So if somebody says you need a super, it means you need a lower third, which basically means you need to describe what's happening on screen. So a locator super is typically within the first few shots and kind of establishes the scene. So this would be like the topic, wolf release or wolf integration, location, Isle Royale National Park. Or butterfly conservation, San Juan Island National Park would kind of be an example of that. And then you need lower thirds for the first time that you see somebody and hear somebody speak. Those are required in this project, and you're going to have to make them from scratch. That's what I'm going to show you in Premiere next. Making these guys from scratch, you're going to need a name on the first line, and you're going to need their title in a smaller text on the lower line. So in this, here I have one that I made earlier. I'm going to show you guys how to make this. So that's what a lower third will look like. It's in the lower third of the screen and identifies the person on camera. And typically you don't want it too close to the edge. It just looks claustrophobic when things are too close to the edge. There's also these things called safe margins. And so what these are title safe and action safe boxes, and you just go into the wrench and you can turn those on or off. They help with alignment and they help with making sure things are in the safe zone. So for broadcast, they typically still stick to this, is that they don't want any text on the outside of the title safe box, which is the inner one. And they don't want anything interesting happening outside of the action safe, which is the wider box. With phones and things, like, these don't get used as much. It was more for the transition from 4x3 televisions to square televisions that you maybe seen at grandma's house, and maybe you had one when you were really young, and then, transitioning into TVs that we're used to seeing now. They use these to make sure that no matter what TV you had, people could still see things. So that's what those are. I just use them as guides. I don't really want to see any text on the outside of this. Not necessarily for standards, but just because it ends up looking bad. So you can turn off these grids. If you want to, they're not going to export the safe margins. And just making it look good. So what you want to think about with these graphics and lower thirds is finding a good place to put it on screen. So you don't want to put it somewhere where it's not going to be readable. You don't want to hide something. So if there's something important happening on screen, you don't want to put your text over it. And you want to put it in a place where it's going to be easy to read. So this is like the standard one that I typically use from ones that I have to make from scratch. Looks professional, you like professional looking font. Switch the font to the top and the bottom. I'd probably spend more time picking out the top font because I don't love that. But the little box behind it, and then it's fading out.
Like I said before, I'm an animal scientist, so working with the vegetation.
A really simple, informational piece. So on higher end projects and things like that, typically we'll spend a little more time making this a little fancier, but not distracting, but this absolutely gets the job done and looks professional. So, to create this guy, you need to identify, where to put it. So first of all, the first time somebody starts talking, you typically cover the first few seconds of the soundbite with some B-roll, and then you want to have them on screen. So you don't have to have them on screen every time they talk, but typically the first time they talk, you want them on screen so you can introduce them to your audience. And then with a few seconds of them being on screen, you're going to have that lower third. So here.
Supposed to do on the island, left to go, but this is going to be our last little round of the Moose Mouse surveys.
So not right at the start of her coming on camera, but a few seconds after, just so it's not too much visual information at once for your viewer. And then they know who they are. Then at other instances, you don't have to put a lower third up. It's a 2-minute video. Only need to put a lower third once up per person. And you only have to really show them once. You can show them on camera more times than that, but as long as you're introducing them. Okay, double check that this camera's rolling. It's gonna be... Okay, cool, we're still going. So now for this guy, rule of thumb for text, needs to be up for long enough to be read twice. So rule of thumb is twice, because if you can read it fast twice, that's enough time for a viewer to see it come on screen, read it, and then it'll fade out. You don't want to leave it up for longer than that, because if it's up for longer, then people will just reread it and stop paying attention to your video, because if there's text on screen or in our view, we tend to read it, how our brains work. So you want to take it down so it's not distracting, but you want to leave it up long enough so that they have time for their eyes leisurely make it over to that part of the screen and be able to read it at a comfortable pace without feeling rushed. So be able to read it twice, then pull that down. Usually for an average size name and title, that's 3 to 4 seconds. As long as it's not super long name or super short name. So that's usually how long you need. Okay. Who here has put text on video in Premiere before? You put text, so you guys new to putting text in Premiere? Okay, cool. So there will be some LinkedIn Learning homework that goes over ways of putting text. There are 3 different ways to put text into Premiere. I use the slightly older way just because I'm just used to editing that way. It's part of my workflow. There is this graphics panel that the LinkedIn Learning videos teach you how to use. And you'll also see a bunch of presets over here that you can just dump on there. In future projects, feel free to use these. For this project, do not use this. You need to make your text from scratch for this project so that you learn how to do it. So you can edit your graphic from there. I typically just like to stay in my editing window. And the way to add a graphic, all you need to do is start the type tool and draw a little box. And it's going to make a little pink graphic on your timeline. Start typing. So I don't actually know if her last name is Smith. I decided to make that up. And earlier, so we're going to pretend it's Smith. Maybe it actually is. Type that there. Then I'm going to make a second box for her title. So she's an intern. Royal. And drag this under there. So there are a few things wrong with just dumping it like this. So there is a stroke on the text. There's an outline. Graphic Design 101, these are bad and cheesy. You don't want to see strokes on our text. And this is like a default thing that people tend to want to do, is because, oh, I can't see it. The H is getting lost in her sleeve over here. I'm just going to put a stroke or an outline on it. Don't do that. So instead, I'm going to go in and turn off that stroke. I may have to go into my graphics panel. There we go. So I'm going to turn that guy off because that's not cool. And I'm going to edit that and turn this off. And again, if you're missing kind of where I'm clicking, the LinkedIn Learning tutorials will show you exactly where these things are. Then I've got that off, but now the H is kind of getting lost in her sleeve here. So I'm going to put a little rectangle box like I did before. So I can just add a new graphic layer, add a rectangle. I'm just going to put it over there. Obviously, I don't want it to cover it, so then I'm going to have to restack my layers in Effect Controls or in the graphics panel to put this behind. So I've got my shape, I'm putting it behind my text. That looks super obnoxious. So adding a a box and then increasing the opacity on it will make that look a little more visually appealing. So like that. This is still too big, so I'm going to go into here, adjust the size, so this is smaller. And we'll say the graphics panel is a bit smoother, but it's also caused my computer to crash sometimes, so that's why I also do this one. And then moving on, so typically I'll right align things. So I'll right align her name there. I'm going to actually make this both a little smaller. And just kind of playing with it until it gets to a point where you think it looks visually appealing. Drop the text. What did I use earlier? Was it? I don't know what I used. Something different. Find something that looks good together, and then form the box around it and play until it looks good. Now, you're not required to use a box, you're not required to use a black box. I care about your text looking good and being legible. So however you get it to look professional, legible, I'm cool with it as long as it looks good. This is the surefire way that I know that makes it look good, professional, in there. So spend some time. I usually spend a lot of time on my first one. So like I'll spend a lot of time making my first one look how I want it to look. And then I'll just copy it. And let's say I need to use a soundbite again for the other person talking. So I need a soundbite for Eli, Elijah. And I'm going to paste it onto there. That's not good. Let's see, where's he talking? There he is. So let's say I need a soundbite, lower third for Elijah here. I can just go in and edit this. And so I've really formed it. Then obviously you'll have to adjust the alignment because you'll have a different length name, but then it's easy. It's really quick to kind of go through and just address all of those. So learn how to do this from scratch. Another thing to think about is which side to put it on. My personal preference is I like to usually put it on the opposite side of the person's rule of thirds. So somebody's usually rule of thirds. I usually like to put it on the opposite side, providing that the background is not too busy. If there's a pretty neutral background like this is not super crazy busy, I like to balance out the frame. I think it looks just more aesthetically pleasing, but that doesn't always work. And also news stations typically just have lower thirds on one side. So whatever you do, whatever you decide, make it consistent and think about it. Don't just like dump it there because that's where you felt like dumping it. Think about, okay, is this background busy? Should I put it on them? Are there multiple people on screen? Because then you obviously have to put it on the side of the person who's talking or who the name belongs to. So think actively about where is a good place to put the lower third and go with that. If you know how to do some animation, if you want to do a slide in or something, by all means do it. Just do it from scratch for this project. If not, I just require a fade. So
do on the island to go, but this is going to be our last little round of this.
Like that, just because without it,
the island.
It just kind of pops on there and it just doesn't look super clean. So just that little fade, right clicking, apply default transition, you can adjust the length of it.
Island.
Makes it look more visually appealing. So that's what I want you to do for text. A few other rules for text. Things that make your graphics or your lower thirds look bad is like poor choice of fonts. Comic Sans is almost always a bad idea. Please don't use that in your news package. So pick an appropriate font. If you've taken 211 or something like that, you will have learned about some basic font pairing rules. If not, you can use online resources like fontpairs.com or Canva has font pairing things, Font Scroll, whatever. You can Google and download fonts to put into Premiere and Adobe software. It's really easy to download. But make sure that they fit the theme of your project. If you have like a fun, playful project, by all means, pick some like cool graphic and some fun colors or whatever. But news, professional, you don't want to distract from your story. So professional. match the theme of your story. Poor placement on screen, so covering somebody up, making it hard to read. These three things kind of go together. So bad colors, poor contrast, and poor placement, making it hard to read. Those make for sucky lower thirds, and we don't want to see any of those. And yeah, distracting animation or motion. So like some slide-ins are nice, so you have like different animations, and you can download presets when we get to the back half of our semester where we talk about some more advanced editing techniques. I'll show you some, like how to do some animation and some cool lower thirds that you can download. I'm hunting for some currently for my projects. But you don't want it to be distracting where people are like, what the hell is happening? Why did this just whiz into the screen and distract me? Okay, so that makes cool, uncool lower thirds, things that make them good. So here's what we kind of went over. The title safe margins. Adding a box, fading it in or out. And if you use the, you don't use the legacy title maker, do you? Okay, cool. Well, if nobody uses the legacy title maker, I'm not even going to go over that guy. It's still on there, but it's old. And no like CTV presets or anything, because I know CTV has their own lower third template. Ravage, I'm assuming, has a lower third template or not?
Something like that, yeah.
Something, yeah. So you get templates, like if you work for a company, often they'll like have a template for you to store things in there. If you have something like that, don't use it for this project. If you want to use that thing in future projects, by all means, just not yet. So that's what we're doing with graphics. Okay, cool. Right. Any questions about adding graphics? Yes.
Are we ever gonna learn how to like make a watermark?
So watermarks, honestly, so the way I would do it, just like off the top of my head, is, and Matt, I know you probably make these in Photoshop all the time, but honestly, the way I would do it is, let's say I wanted to put Jesse Grace across this, switch to there, find a rotating point. There we go. And I could, and I would just like increase the opacity off of it. And this is just like, let's see, that guy. So then you could like go into the text there. You could go into that graphic. And so I could change it to like a gray color and then increase the opacity of it. We kind of put a watermark over there. And yeah, like once you've exported it, that's not going to come off. Now, do you ever have watermarks to your images or anything like that?
Actually, stopped doing that.
Okay, how come?
Well, my Squarespace website doesn't allow you to right-click save images from it, which is really nice. They have to just do a screen grab,
Okay.
which kills the quality of the images.
Yeah.
And I used to put them on all my images on Instagram, but I actually stopped doing that.
Yeah.
Most people don't.
And kind of like.
Because they can work around them.
So what you see like watermarks, a lot of like stock image sites, they'll put like a massive Getty Images or what's the one, video blocks, story blocks on there. Honestly, for clients, like if you are speaking to a client and you're worried about a client like not paying you or whatever when they're seeing a draft or not like stealing your video, is I don't know Google where it is, but you can put a time code onto the video. So you burn a timestamp onto it. And so that makes it less obnoxious, like, hey, I think you're going to steal my thing and I'm putting a watermark on it. But the timestamp takes up a big portion of the screen, and then you can tell them, like, hey, I want your edits to use the timestamp on there to tell me when you want their edits. So you're like, hey, I'm helping you. And also, there's a big timestamp, and I know you're not going to be able to use this video.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a more subtle of, like, I'm a little nervous about this being taken. But I'm doing it to help you. Thing. But yeah, that's how you do it. So if you're putting it on a stock website or something like that, and I think just like putting the text on there and making it opaque would do that. And you can probably download templates for watermarks as well, but at least you can do that. Okay, any other questions about graphics? Yeah.
For the locator, Super, what if your soundbite is introducing where you are?
That's totally fine. You don't have to use one.
Okay.
I'm cool with that. Yeah. So typically in news, they're standard. For this project, as long as you're like you introduce the location somewhere near the beginning, and that you have a lower third for every time, for every new person. That way you're learning how to do text. That was all that. Good question. Cool. All good otherwise? Awesome. Good questions, guys. Okay, so now where are we? We've added our graphics, we've added audio, we're going to color correct, we know how to do that. So typically, I mean, these aren't terrible. Like, they're pretty well balanced. There's nothing crazy on these. If you see one that has a color temperature that's off, like if you see a shot that's slightly green, color corrected. If there's inconsistencies, different cameras, use your knowledge. You want to see consistent color in your work. So, watch, export, watch again. So, make sure you watch again after you export it, because sometimes things go wrong when you export. Sometimes you accidentally export too long a thing. Sometimes it drops frames. Just get in the habit of watching it before and after the export. Please watch things, like you hopefully proofread your papers before you turn them in. Please watch your videos before you turn them in. It will save you a bunch of points. So you're dropping in the Google Drive, and then you're submitting a final script. So I told you, obviously we submitted our separate script before. If you forgot to submit your other script, do it today. You're only going to lose 1 point for submitting it today, and it's the 10-point thing. You have to write a script anyway because you're recording your narration. You may as well get the 10 points. 10 or 10 pence if you're into, wow, maybe I should proofread my assignment sheet. So for your 10 pence in this assignment, you're going to be submitting a new script. So this is more of a, let's see, where is the heading? This is one that you just download the template that's in the main assignment. So you'll see there it has a submission. Canvas will put it like in there. This is coming up soon. So you're submitting both the final video in the drive and the script in Canvas. So this is a more traditional script. You'll probably never see the script that you submitted yesterday ever again, because it's a learning template, like it's a learning one. This is more standard. This is like the one that Sarah Pooler uses in her broadcast class. You'll likely have to use this one if you take field production, which is the class after this, where you learn how to shoot and edit video. Most of us in the department use this, and it's pretty similar to a more standard script that you're going to see in the industry. So here, there's instructions on it. So it says there, like obviously it's a 2-column script. So as with the dialogue scene one, you have audio on the right, video on the left. Things to note here, your reporter track is going to be capitalized, whereas your sound bites are not. This is broadcast standard. Sound bites, word for word. So verbatim means if they say I want If they sneeze, I want a chew in there. So word for word, and there that's used for closed captioning. So get used to typing word for word. And if you haven't changed any sound bites since you submitted this script, just copy paste it. Same with narration, then just copy paste it from the last one into this and change the case. Also, new sentence, new line, and tabbed in. So again, broadcast standard, a new sentence is a new line, and you want it to hit in 5 spaces. So it looks like this. So on time codes and super is in the left column. So here, so let's say you have like a nat pop here. You're going to put the time code for your nat pop. You don't have to worry about frames. You can just do minutes and seconds. It's only a 2-minute project. And do that. So let's say you have your soundbite in there, put your time code in there. So that's narration. Then you want your super, aka your lower third, in this left column as well. So just write down what it says. Then you want to put a very general description of what the video is. So let's say like over this set here. Obviously this is just an example that has nothing to do with our current project. Let's say over this stretch of your narration, you're showing moose clips. Just put moose clips. You don't have to describe every shot. Just put shots of moose. Or prairie. Or, a boat. Things like that. Super general description of what video is happening there. That'll be in the left column. So time codes. You want to separate, so every stretch of narration and soundbite, like you did in the other script, it's just a different format. Yeah, so there's a description. So this guy submitted with your final project. So that should be the last thing you do. The script is the last thing you want to do. So do you have any changes? So if you do end up changing something and you realize that your script didn't quite work, don't worry about resubmitting the other template. Just make sure it's current to what your final project looks like in this version. Because when I'm grading this, I'm going to pull up your script. Because sometimes if I can't really hear something or I miss a word or I'm not sure what you're saying, which happens more often than you think, then I'll have the script pulled up so I can at least follow along your story and then make a comment about, having audio levels balanced or making sure you enunciate. At least I can then tell if you're telling a good story. Because I can't hear it and your script doesn't match it, then I can't tell if you're telling a good story and I can't hear it. So this will help with that as well. This is also a type of script that'll be given to a director or be used for closed captioning or given to a client or an editor. So this is a typical edit. So getting used to doing things the way we may have to do them in the future. That's what that script looks like. Any questions about the script? Okay, awesome. So that's there to download. The template should be there. Got your Google Drive folder. And lastly, so I'm going to add that Moose B-roll link into the assignment sheet now. You go to LinkedIn Learning. As I mentioned, you'll learn how to do text. There'll be some LinkedIn Learning on B-roll, searching for clips, that type of thing. So same as usual there, all due Monday. That's already published in Canvas. And submitting those things. Now, before I wrap up, I'm going to show you what the video that goes with this timeline looks like. So this is an older one of mine, a couple of years ago, and I've got this timeline pulled up, and yeah, I'll tell you what I'm showing it to you in a second. So. And it's super dark in the beginning of it, but that's pretty much par for the course for me. So. Hey guys, it's Jessie with the National Park Service team, and this month's episode of Outside Science Inside Parks is here in Capulin Volcano National Monument, and biologist Zach. And these tiny little guys and girls just can't wait to meet you. Check it out.
So we'll take the bird and put them in people's hands, and it's just awesome to watch because people get so excited about it. And they get a little scared, but it's pretty fun after the bird flies off because usually they jump a little bit, and then they're just so excited and their face lights up.
Thank you, thank you.
1, 2, 3. Wasn't that cool?
So it's one of the only banding sites that the public is encouraged to come out and watch what we do, and it's up close and personal. And it's really it's an experience you can't get any place.
So we sought out a project that we felt like could reach people and become a crux of our education program to teach them about what climate change is and how it's affecting national park landscapes.
They're a great indicator species for climate change. So through the phenology and all the banding data, we can see changes over time.
So what I do is I wait for them to land on the feeder. And then what you want to do is you want to be firm yet gentle. And then I put them in the bag under the net still, just in case they fly out of the bag, they're still in the trap. You close it in here. Bring it out.
So first you have to know what kind of species you have because the bands fit a certain species, and then our pliers are specially made for the size of the band that we're using so that you can't squeeze them too tight.
She has a band on her, now she's going to take her out and do the rest of her measurements, which include her wing, her tail, her colon, which is the exposed part of her bill.
We weigh them on a jeweler's scale because they weigh so little that that's the only way we can. 3.4, and that's in grams.
She's giving it a drink to give it a reward for behaving itself and to make sure that it's not lost any energy through the process.
You know, it's really easy to look at something and say, I've seen a hummingbird, I know what that is, but to see it up close, to get your hands on it, to see it with such detail, you know, it gives you an opportunity to have a whole new vision and open your eyes to something different. Our whole process out here is about making the ordinary extraordinary.
He's red! He's red! Let's get to know him.
Thanks for watching Outside Science. And okay, so in that one, I typically don't do things like that. I never use dip to blacks and include little things at the end. But it was so cute because the park service ranger really showed a human side, and it was such cool timing that his son had never released a hummingbird before, and we got to capture that. So he was kind of like, hey, do you mind capturing this just for a memory? And then I sent it to him. I was like, this is too cute. I need to include it. And if I think Munchkin is cute, I know it's super cute because, yeah, it's my standard for this. The video here, so the reason I'm showing this guy is basically, that's a pretty straightforward edit, right? There's nothing crazy. It's just B-roll and people talking. There's no fancy animation, anything. It is a straightforward edit. Gosh, this was a nightmare to put together. So basically, this is what the timeline looked like. Obviously, there's music there on the bottom. I had to loop the song multiple times. You guys don't have to worry about music yet with this one. So basically, when shooting this, I was shooting with different microphones, and so I would shoot the whole process from wide shot, have them explain it, and the process of them banding a hummingbird probably takes 5 minutes. This was a 3-minute video. So, and that was just a small part of the video. So to condense that, and then have them explain, describe it multiple times to make sure I had a clean take of it, and then get different angles of them doing it and try and match up at different points of when they were describing something and showing it, and then making sure people's mouths matched. So for example, at this point in it, so I recorded him talking about this at a different time, so I was very careful to make sure you couldn't see his mouth at any point during this. And actually, the first half of his first description was better, and the second half of these other ones had to marry those together and make sure there was never a point where you could see their mouth. Kind of hunting for a shot like that. The same here with Cassie. It was kind of funny because one of the interns who was actually doing most of the measuring had lost her voice that day, so I had somebody else describing what she was doing, which made it kind of interesting. And just marrying that together, and then little things like where he turned away from the microphone, and I had to create this super sharp spike to even make it sound consistent. Here, Lynn kind of spoke at a different volume. You can see she's higher in the front, lower in the back. So kind of did the opposite with the pen tool. I got the B-roll on a different layer over here. Just kind of, it was definitely a challenging thing to sew together with all those elements. So point being is, that was a simple, it's a simple video when you watch it. There's nothing crazy. Nobody's like, oh, it's effects. It's cute hummingbirds. In order to have something simple, you're going to spend hours behind the scenes messing with a pen tool, or messing with trying to just find the right angle, the right shot where you don't have somebody talking over somebody else. So all these hours that you spend, make your editing invisible again. And if you don't spend them, your video ends up really choppy and noticeable. So while sometimes it may feel unappreciated or thankless that you just did something and it's oh, it looks smooth, and your friend's gonna be oh, cool. But if you don't spend all these hours, it's gonna look super choppy. And not look good. So, trust me on it, part of the process. We will notice your work. So that's something we'll definitely notice how smooth and how much time you spend smoothing things out. So on that note, what we're gonna do for the rest of class is gonna go around, we're gonna chat about your scripts. I'm gonna take a 5 or 7 minute break, and then I'm gonna talk to everybody just about how they're doing. and how the script's going, pull it up in Canvas, and talk about that. So hang out, you can start working on your project in a minute or two. Let's start come in.